check through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting.
Chair, I'm sorry, I wasn't present at the last meeting, so I can't confirm. Somebody that was present needs to confirm.
Likewise, Chair, I wasn't present at the last meeting, so like Councillor Rose Seaborn, I'm unable to confirm.
Councillor Seaborn, Councillor Evans wasn't at the last meeting, so they can't confirm. Councillor James can confirm. Yes. Councillor Jones. Yeah. Councillor Onson.
Yes, I think it's quite accurate.
Okay, thank you very much. Action sheet. Catherine, could you update the members on the actions, please?
From the action sheet, you can see that there's been a further request to an Iron Bevan Health Board, which we're waiting for a response. Also, a response to the second action sheet is awaited, but as you know, our Scrutiny Support Officer is unavailable at the moment, so it could be that those responses have come through, we just haven't received them yet, and the recommendations response was received and it's been circulated to you all on the 4th of January.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say that I'm disappointed that frequently we consult with an Iron Bevan Health Board and we don't seem to be getting any consultation responses back. I just want to state that disappointment.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Any more questions? Main report. The purpose of the report is to analyse the number of households that will be affected by the transition to universal credit during 2017-2018 and onwards to 2022, and to assess the potential impact of universal credit on claimants and support services. Suggest introductions are carried out. There's a lot of people here who may not know each other.
They've got to come in first.
If we could actually invite these in, please. I'd like to welcome the invitees. And could we introduce ourselves, please, starting with me and Councillor Jenkins from Snatchwood and off to come.
Hi, I'm Catherine Turner and I'm the Scrutiny Support Officer.
Hi, I'm Faye Jones, Councillor for St Giles. Thank you.
Good morning, Nick Jones from New Inn.
Good morning, Dave Congreve, Communities, and my role in this particular meeting is that I help Councillor Daniels, who's the chair of the Welfare Reform Project Group, organise the agenda and progress the work.
Good morning, Richard Davis, Head of Revenues and Benefits.
Good morning, Councillor Seaborn, Rose Seaborn from Fairwater Ward.
Morning all, Councillor Stuart Evans representing the Blenavon Ward.
Councillor Gaynor James, Pontypool Ward.
Can we invite you to introduce ourselves, please?
Emma Davis, Collaboration and Improvement Officer.
Dave Daniels, Chair of the Welfare Reform Project Group.
Elke Winton, Group Manager for Housing, Torvine Social Care and Housing.
Malage, the Chief Officer of Citizens Advice, Torvine.
Hi, Happy New Year. Lisa Charles, Blenavon Community Housing.
Hi, Claire Jones, Revs and Bens, Torvine.
Thank you. Richard Aston, Partnership Manager for Department for Work and Pensions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the members?
Yes, Chair. If you allow, I'd ask the first question.
Could I ask Richard Aston from the TWP for his perspective locally on the introduction of universal credit?
Good morning all. Thank you first and foremost for the invitation to this forum. I'm relatively new to this particular post. My predecessor Barry Lewis, you may have been familiar with him in previous attendance, I'm not sure of that. Obviously I've had sight of the scrutiny report, but first of all I'd like to focus primarily on what I think is my positive role in trying to foster closer working relationships with some of the key stakeholders, first and foremost around this particular forum, but wider across the Torvine locality. What I'm trying to do is improve the information and awareness of some of the key changes that Universal Credit has brought since it rolled out to full service. That's included regular forms and communications with Richard Davis there, Malage and therefore Citizens Advice Bureau. And what I'm trying to ensure is that where we do come across some complex cases with particular customer scenarios, that I'll do my best to try and answer those, or certainly progress those further on the line, whether that's a technical query or whether that's a query that's related to someone who perhaps hasn't received their benefit on time. But what I have tried to do is make sure that I'm available to anyone around this forum and wider, that if there are any questions moving forward, please use me as a conduit for Department for Work and Pensions in Torvine, and I'll certainly respond soonest with any information that you require.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to ask a question if I may. Thank you for that, Richard, very useful. Could you tell us, I mean, obviously we knew you're in Torvine, we piloted the scheme. Could you tell us what you would do differently if you were to go through this process again?
From a policy point of view, I'm not a policy maker, so it's something I can... Sorry, I'm not a policy maker, so I'm not able to sort of change policy, but what I can try and influence is changes to Universal Credit Platform. The system that we currently use is an agile system, so things can be changed within a 2-week cycle around some of the technical and procedural aspects of Universal Credit. The first forum that I attended, which was a welfare reform group back in, I think, the tail end of October with some of the members here, there was rightfully so some concerns around the costs of ringing the service centre for individuals, and only the following day then that those costs for ringing the service centre were removed. So that was a positive change that shows that policymakers and ministers are listening to some of the concerns around universal credit. Additionally, then in the November budget announcements, there was the removal of the 7 waiting days, which again I think has been well received by those impacted by universal credit and those who will perhaps have to utilise universal credit as we move forward. And we continue to make changes. As I said, I'm not a policy maker, but what I'm trying to foster, as I said, with some of the key forum members here and yourselves, is if you do have any concerns that I can raise through the right channels, then we can look to get things changed if there is the potential to do that. And I welcome those suggestions, ideas, opinions.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's been very helpful.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Seaborn?
Yeah. Try again. Good morning. On the Martin's Money Matters, there was a campaign yesterday that I read that there was a lot of influence trying to be made to government about breathing space between people receiving their benefits, their universal credit benefits, and having a lot of debt because of the waiting time, the 5 or 6 weeks waiting time. I wondered how much breathing space you give to your clients before you try to claim back funding or even have a conversation with them to say, see how much debt they were in and how they can be helped.
Obviously, some of the budget changes that were announced in the recent sort of budget announcements has removed the 7 waiting days that were there initially. So that's obviously more of a positive experience for those claiming universal credit. And people can access up to 100% of their benefit in advance, and can now, instead of having only 6 months to pay that back, that can be spread over 12 months. So there's a longer period that those individuals then have to budget and pay back that initial advance.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Could I come in on the back of Rosie's question, really? You say, Richard, that they have 12 months to pay back the raise. Is there any kind of interest on that in that 12-month period? Thank you very much.
Councillor Seaborn? No. Sorry, Councillor Molson.
Morning. Thank you for attending this morning. Where you say that you'd like to improve, especially when you've got complex cases, when you say improve, would that be working with many agencies that is year to date and refer on?
Yeah, indeed. Emma and I have got a forum that we created. We had our first meeting together probably in October, and where we decided then to form a collective complex needs plan for Torfaen. So that involves my colleagues from job centres in Cwmbran and Pontypool, some other key stakeholders there, along with some colleagues of Emma's and other providers that we think can support customers in crisis. It's a non-exhaustive list of complex needs. It could be homelessness, it could be substance misuse, it could be a combination of anything. And what we want to ensure is that if any of that is presented to us in a job centre or an external location, that we can signpost that customer immediately to the right support and help, so they get the support and help there and then. Okay, and that will be an ongoing strategy. We've got a follow-up meeting, I believe, next week, where we've invited further stakeholders that we think can benefit that plan, and this will continue. Part of my role sees me replicate this in Blaenau Gwent, and this idea now will move across into Blaenau Gwent, and I've also shared it with some of my colleagues who support Cardiff External Agenda as well. Thank you.
Councillor Jones?
Hello, I was just wondering, is there a shortage of work coaches in the borough, as there seems to be evidence in delays in meeting with them in case studies provided?
I was aware of some of the feedback that we received, probably back in the summer when I was in a different role, but Universal Credit obviously rolled out in Torfaen. It was the first area in South East Wales that was going to be impacted, first and foremost by Universal Credit Live service some time ago, and then more recently Universal Credit Full service. The training window saw some of our work coaches out of the office for 3 weeks at a time to make sure that they received that entire training, and that did pose some temporary issues with capacity, but I can assure you that those have been remedied. And only yesterday I was in Pontypool office and I spoke to my colleague Stephen Williams in Cwmbran, and people can access appointments tomorrow for a new claim. But as I've said in previous responses, if someone was in financial hardship, we would accommodate that person there and then, and we would make sure that there was a work coach available for them.
Thank you. So it's better now.
Any more questions? Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you. When I was reading the report and obviously subsequent information, what I would like to know was there any gaps? Online applications was a cause of concern at one time where people were having their forms returned saying it wasn't filled in correctly. So how are you helping our residents actually fill their forms in? If one comes back, are you calling them in to help, or are you just saying fill it in again?
Obviously, we've got a contract with local authority to provide both personal budgeting support and assisted digital support. So for those who aren't able to self-serve, then we would make a referral to Richard's team using a referral template, and then they would receive that support there if they required it. But that's not to say that if they attend the office, have an appointment with their work coach, or see people at the front of house area that are called service delivery coaches, that we would be able to support them. And also, you know, we are trying to foster better working relationships with those who can support us digitally. So, you know, what I'm trying to encourage is that we have got space in the job centres. So if providers want to come in and use a desk, a work area, or the free Wi-Fi, then they're more than welcome to do that, and we would welcome that, so we can ensure that people have the right digital access that they require to, you know, to get their claim registered, up and running, and progressing.
Thank you, Chair. How do we know, if I were a universal credit and I'd filled my form in incorrectly and it came back and I tried again, how would I know that you've got that service to offer?
With a customer who's claiming universal credit, they would have a local relationship with their work coach in the job centre, but they would also then have an assigned case worker or manager that at the moment is based in Bangor Contact Centre, or Service Centre I should say, apologies. So if there's any actions required outstanding on behalf of the work coach, the case manager or the customer, then there would be a notification sent either by email or text message, and that would be the customer's preference that they would tell us they would prefer to be notified by text message or an email. And then they would access their journal, which is their online account, and there would be a clear instruction then as to say there's some information outstanding around housing costs, or we need you to verify this particular piece of information, or confirm that your housing costs are this amount, or can you please confirm that you've responded to that employer's feedback about your interview. Anything that requires the customer to interact, they would receive a notification. So if there was outstanding information, they would be notified by that. And obviously customers then engage with their work coaches on a regular basis anyway. So they, you know, anything that needed to be discussed would be discussed there and then in our interview, whether face-to-face or telephone or email. Thank you.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me, Richard, I mean, you were saying about the IT that's available, but what are we doing to try to support people who are not IT savvy, really?
Thank you. Again, you know, we've got a contract with Richard's team around assisted digital support, and you know, we would make use of that where appropriate to do so. But we can offer one-to-one coaching. If, you know, ultimately the work coach's role is to ensure that customers access the benefit they're entitled to, but also to ensure that we remove any barrier elimination. So if there's a customer that has a particular digital requirement, then either the work coach would coach that individual, or we would seek to bring in a provider or contract to a provider to bring in that digital support. And that could be delivered in-house at the job centre, or it could be delivered at the provider's premise. What we've got recently have changed the way that we can contract funding for a particular provision. So if we felt that there was a number of customers in Pontypool that required a specific digital support, very basic, to those who perhaps have got a good level of digital support but they need some additional support, then we can tailor that provision by contracting it to a provider that can support that group of customers. And that might be 2 customers, it might be 20 customers, but that's how we can respond to that particular situation. Thank you.
Councillor Jones?
Leading on from that question, do you think there are cases where there's some people who really struggle with literacy and perhaps have shame around that and don't come forward easily to their work coach or anyone else to explain their problems and can then get into huge troubles because of this?
I think we're aware that there will be cases where people, you know, are quite far removed from the digital agenda. and in those particular cases, then there are steps that we can take to support those. And it's all circumstance-based, so I won't want to comment on individual cases, but if people aren't able to, access things digitally because they're that far removed from that agenda, then there are steps that we can take to support them. And I guess the work coach, are skilled enough to identify those cases, and likewise the case manager, if they felt that they weren't getting information digitally, then that would be a three-way conversation between the case manager in the service centre, the work coach in the local job centre, and then the customer. So we would identify that relatively quickly, and we would take steps to, alleviate that concern.
Thank you, because that's the bit that worries me, that they might be trying to hide it so much that other things come to the forefront then, and then they seem quite difficult and get into trouble because of that. But if you feel people are very skilled in that area, hopefully that's going to be helpful.
I'll just add again, coming back to that complex needs plan that we're in the process of, creating and moving forward. Digital is a complex need, so we would include that as an area that we would be keen to focus on to make sure that we can access digital support for those, those variety of digital skill levels.
Councillor Nick Jones.
It was just a quick question for clarity. We've seen cases where there are difficulty with people accessing these systems. Can you just clarify the date at which someone's claim will start? So if they approach you and they have difficulty with these forms, when will their benefits, when will they be entitled to the benefits? Can you just clarify that for us, please?
If someone makes an initial claim online, they have 10 days to verify that entire claim process. So they may commence, inputting some basic details. They have 10 days then to actually provide all of the initial information to commence the benefit claim.
So can I just ask a supplemental, when does the claim actually start from then?
Sorry, the claim would start from the day that I wish to claim benefit from this date. For those cases, perhaps for people who are employed and then commence universal credit, the claim would start from the date that they wish, but obviously benefit entitlement would alter depending on wages or any other sort of form of income that they have access to. But the claim would start from the day that they request it, and then that would be considered depending on the circumstances leading to that.
Sorry, Chair, again on there. So following up from that, do you then follow up everybody who's actually put in an initial claim? So if they get to the 10-day point, is there a system to back up to make sure that these people don't fall out of the system for some of the reasons that we've already discussed this morning?
If I can take that away from the forum and clarify, and if I could feed that back to see, exactly what the process is with that, if you don't mind, and then I'll provide some policy guidance to confirm that.
Thank you.
Jake, can I suggest that that information is fed through all members of the scrutiny committee?
Okay. Any more questions?
We've noticed how closely you work with the council officers and your other partners. Is that happening right across the borough, or is it just because this was a pilot right across the Wales, the DWP in partnership with local councils and other organisations?
Indeed, as I said, my role is local partnership manager for both Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent. And additionally, I have colleagues then who cover all of the other boroughs. So my colleague Sarah Maston, that some of you might be familiar with, covers Newport and Monmouthshire. My colleague Kerry Pritchard then covers Merthyr and Caerphilly area. And I've got two colleagues then, Sue Harris and Gaynor Williams, that cover the Cardiff and the Vale local authority areas. And that model is replicated across Wales, depending on the size of the geography. So, obviously Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen are relatively close together, but I couldn't comment on the makeup of North and Mid Wales, but there is a partnership manager role that would support and provide the exact same structure that I do.
Have you noticed during the pilot project any gaps that we need to fill in our partnership relationship?
As I said, I'm relatively new to the role. I'm only taking up post in late October. If there's gaps in provision, then obviously I would be notified that first and foremost from my colleagues in the job centre. So if we were missing something around provision, then my role is really to go out and seek to find whether that's something that's being delivered currently or something that we need to look at procuring. But I always encourage good communication, so if there's any concerns, any gaps or any comments or opinions or feedback, then I've always welcomed that. My background is job centres. I've worked in job centres for 20 plus years, so my sort of experiences from an operational point of view, managing the job centre and the customer service delivery. So I think that puts me in good stead to transition to this role. And I have always got my job centre sort of hat on to think, well, what would the customers need? What is missing from this particular area? So again, I welcome any feedback or questions that you have further on down the line outside this forum. Please utilise me as you're weighing into Department for Work and Pensions. And if I can't answer the question, then I know a colleague who can, and I'll provide feedback soonest.
Right, can we ask Dave Congreve and Richard Davis to provide their overview from the revenue and benefits perspective, please?
Press the button first. Thank you, Chair. Probably useful for me to just pick up 2 or 3 of the main points that I think have come from your previous discussion. It might help kind of explore some of those areas as well. I think the first point to reflect on from our perspective, and I think Richard made it quite well, is that actually there's 2 sets of issues with the universal credit. Some relate to policy, or in fact many relate to policy, and I think the report makes the context about this is UK government policy. That's different, I think, to the things that Richard quite rightly has sort of said, right, well, actually there are things that we can do about the implementation and the administration to make sure that, okay, there are challenges within how universal credit is designed and some impacts arising from that, and we need to mitigate those through effective partnership working, and I'm very confident that we're doing as much of that as we can. We can explore that later. But I think then equally you need to be assured that in terms of administrating that system, whether it is from the DWP's end or from our end in Rebs and Bens, that's working as effectively as possible. So DWP, I think, will talk very positively and quite rightly about a very high percentage of people entitled to universal credit getting paid on time and getting access to their entitlement on time within the constraints of the policy design of universal credit. And I think those 2 things are useful, just differentiating between those 2 things, because although Richard has quite rightly said there are some changes to the policy that will impact on how we're able to do things and remove some of the worst things that people have heard about for some clients of universal credit. Universal credit fundamentally isn't going to change in terms of its design. So I think that was the first point, really, that it's useful to think about that in terms of the policy and the administration. And I think, I'm very assured, I think, picking up the second point that Richard commented on, I think Councillor Seaborn was trying to get at it really to some extent, was, well, actually, are things different in Torvide in terms of our approach to partnership working as opposed to elsewhere? And I think it's difficult for us to make that judgment, but certainly you can explore different perspectives here this morning, and I think the fact that we've got such good engagement with the DWP, both on administration and on challenging and exploring and informing some of those policy changes, I think is part of what you'll form that view on. I think the third point about gaps in services, I think you've explored and come to a view, I think the same as us really, that there are lots of challenges for vulnerable clients in universal credit. One of the advantages of partnership working is actually being able to, as Richard said, co-produce, if you like, work with the DWP on how do we ensure that the map, the journey for vulnerable clients, and that's a wide range of groups as far as universal credit is concerned, how do we ensure that that journey, those pathways are well informed and well marked out and everybody knows how to access them. So because we've got good partnership arrangements, we're able to co-produce that, if you like. That's a bit of jargon, but that means to work very closely with the DWP to make sure the local circumstances, which I'll come on into a second, are very well reflected in that mapping out, so people can find their way easily through what would otherwise be a very complicated system of local support. I think in terms of gaps, one of the things that I think the executive member has been very mindful of, no doubt he'll want to comment on it later on as well, was that I think when we looked at universal credit, we were hugely mindful of the challenges this presents to people's budgeting and their personal behaviour in terms of administering a much less generous system of support to start with. So universal credit is the way that actually the UK government is administering a lot of its savings that it's made on individual changes elsewhere. So overall, what people are experiencing, whether they get it through universal credit or whether they get it through the individual bits currently of that system, is a much less generous system of welfare support. Now, that's a fact because it is index linked in a particular way. Those changes are there, and I think and the impact of those things can be explored. Because of that, the financial circumstances of a much wider range of people are affected by the welfare reforms. So mindful of that, one of the gaps that I think the executive member was very keen to fill is in terms of our financial support and our financial inclusion support for people. So you'll be aware that we've had a team funded by Communities First. Executive members made a decision to fund that team centrally so that that support remains available for universal credit claimants and for others, because it's a much more widespread impact. So I thought those were three things really just to differentiate between policy and sort of implementation, to comment on the partnership working as we feel it is actually in Torvine, and just to pick up a conversation on gaps. In terms of then perhaps some of the more detail, it might be appropriate to hand over to Richard with some of the facts and figures about what we've done, and then open it up for more discussion.
Thank you, Dave. I noticed references to pilot project in some of the questions. In actual fact, this is not a pilot project. It's the full service of universal credit that we've seen come into fruition here in Torvine. We have had pilot projects and demonstration projects that we've been a part of in the past, but this is the full service. We were the first authority to be fully affected in Wales, although Flintshire went before us. We were the first where the 2 job centres in the locality were affected. There are currently 2,000 households in Torvine who are in receipt of universal credit based on the latest information we have from the Department for Work and Pensions. I just want to talk about some of the specific impacts very briefly. As Richard has said, we are going to see some improvements to the universal credit system. Government in the Chancellor's autumn budget have introduced some remedies and some improvements that will help authorities in the future who are coming into full service. But if you bear in mind, we've had full service for 6 months. We're working with the old universal credit full service scheme. So we still have a 7-day waiting period for claimants in Torvine. They still don't get paid for their first 7 days. We still have a situation where customers don't have a 2-week cushion of a housing benefit payment when they make the new claim for housing benefit, as is proposed. And many of those remedies, they're in the report, I understand, will be introduced between February and April. But we're still dealing with the consequences of what was introduced in July, and I would underline that point. And so are our partners, and so are departments within the council. So I welcome the changes. We all welcome the changes. Hopefully we've had some influence on those changes in terms of our experience, but we have been dealing with what I would describe as a broken system to date. We shouldn't have been a test pilot for universal credit, but it appears as if authorities like ourselves have been. So the consequences of those 7-day waiting periods, delays in the first monthly payment, etc., and no doubt we have seen an improvement, has been to cause considerable hardship for certain people within our community, and we've seen the case studies, and you all probably know from your wards and your constituent information about those cases. So I don't have to go into them, and I know we have more detail. We have had from housing associations and registered social landlords reports of an increase in rent arrears, particularly at the start of tenancies, attributable in part to those delays at the start of the universal credit payment. And as an authority, we've seen an increase in requests for one-off discretionary housing payments. We paid out £40,000 more this year than last year, and most of those one-off payments are attributable to delays in universal credit payments. From my own point of view, I've dealt with some very vulnerable people who I didn't expect to go through this process. I think it was pointed out by DWP when we looked at the preparation for universal credit in Torvine that we would need to be prepared for dealing with some very vulnerable people. But in actual fact, I'm surprised by the numbers, and that's really as a consequence of things like employment and support allowance, mandatory reconsiderations and appeals, where people have ceased to receive employment and support allowance and are appealing against it, and consequently they are invited to claim universal credit, We've dealt with a number of those customers, and I'm sure you've come across them too, with complex needs, significant health problems, and I would say that some of our officers haven't been sufficiently skilled to deal with some of the situations that have come up, those unexpected situations with customers like that. As Richard said, the Council is providing digital support and personal budgetary support to those requiring assistance. My team is at the front of that, so I've got 4 officers who are dealing with digital support in Cwmbran and Pontypool, taking referrals from the job centres. I have a personal budgetary support officer, Claire, but she works very closely with lots of different people across various organisations, including within Torfaen. We've seen an increase in customers accessing food banks, and personally, I've issued more food bank vouchers as a result of the starting point, the delays at the start of universal credit that we've seen. But we have worked very closely with DWP to identify issues, and with the partnership managers, Richard fulfills a crucial role in terms of the interface between our organisation and the DWP. And I think we have successfully addressed some individual issues as a result of that relationship. Not always to the satisfaction of the customer, but I think we've done our level best to address those issues, and I acknowledge the role of the partnership managers. I would also say that we, as an organisation, we have lots of people around the table here who have worked very hard to develop the networking and the linkages required in order to make universal credit work in Torfaen. We've done our level best to mitigate the initial impact of as Dave says, of the framework as it's currently devised, and some of the consequences have been difficult for us to deal with.
Any questions? Councillor Seymour?
Thank you, Chair. My colleague and I did a piece of work just before Christmas within our own ward, knocking doors and asking if they were affected by universal credit. And the stories that I heard were unbelievable. One lady, no problem at all, sorted it out straight away. But my mother or my sister, is that terrible? They haven't had money. They're not going to have a Christmas this year. You know, that was the issue that we were talking about. My question to Richard is, how long do you think you're going to have to play catch-up with the previous information that you had to deal with and the new rules now from February?
I think that's a very good point. I think that maybe others may be able to comment in terms of rent arrears and issues that have been created as a result of the setup. I think we know from the cases that we're dealing with respect to budgetary support that it may take months, if not years, to resolve some of these issues, I'm afraid. And I think there has been an administrative burden created for the authority and for other organisations as a result of the first phase of universal credit that may not be felt by other authorities coming in who will be dealing with the new iteration of it.
No, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good answer, actually. I was just going to add, I think this might feel a little less... I'm not sure how to phrase this, really, but in some senses, I don't think we'll ever catch up. And the point being that actually, although there are changes that are very positive to the design, moving from a 6-week wait to a 5-week wait is a marginal change. Having the ability to have a loan earlier, but have that having that loan repaid in a more staged way is helpful, but it's not solving the problem. You know, the problem is actually that, as Richard has said, we will see an increasing number of people who will still face quite difficult financial circumstances despite those changes, and the burden of that falls on us and the way in which we then resource our partners to help with that. And I think we've done a very proactive job in doing that, largely because I think the executive member has been a strong advocate for investment in services like the CAB, like financial inclusion, like TRAC and other voluntary organisations who are part of what Richard was saying, is that provider. Going back to what Councillor Jones was saying about how do we ensure that people engage if they've got literacy and numeracy difficulties? Well, the answer to that is actually they like a familiar face. So people will actually work with organisations that aren't set up specifically to deal with universal credit or to deal with the difficulties of the benefit system. But a lot of engagement we get is through libraries, through third sector organisations, through other organisations that we resource. So to me, the only way to ensure that we do as much as we can is to have a very well developed network of services, which is what the Welfare Reform Project Group does. Even so, my own view, and it is my own view, because we're at an early stage both in Torfaen and in the UK on universal credit, my own view is we won't ever catch up with some of the financial consequences. Now, that is not to do with how organisations are behaving locally. That is back to potentially the design of something that at one level has been very successful. UK government policy has been taking a lot of money out of something at a UK level. The implications for us in local government and for the third sector are that we're picking up much more demand and we have less resource to do that with. But that is not something that we can deal with as local government officers. But I think it's a really interesting question. I think it was well phrased.
Councillor Daniels?
Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, if I could just feed in at that point, really. I mean, I think, again, I'll probably reiterate that locally the DWP have been very good at working with us at trying to mitigate as much of this as possible, but we are all working within the framework of UK government DWP, where many of these issues come from, and until they change tack on many of the policies, many of the different aspects of this particular benefit change, we will be playing catch up, and unfortunately they will be. I've got significant concerns about the impact on mental health, which I think needs. That would be my contribution towards a gap at the moment, because it's an onerous system at the moment. The way it's paid is it's not terribly conducive to good mental health, because you're with some high level mental health conditions, you're effectively giving them one big lump sum to pay, to manage themselves, and I don't think there's enough support there to help higher level mental health properly manage their finances. There's many aspects with mental health I think really need exploration around universal credit, because I think there are certain aspects of it which exacerbate and possibly precipitate worsening mental health. That's my. I mean, I've elaborated quite a bit, and I would have led into this later, but if we're talking at this stage of the scrutiny of something to sort of dig a little bit more into, probably mental health would be one element I'd go for.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. Councillor Moulton?
Totally agree with you there, Dave. I personally, within my other role, have identified the increase of mental health, and I'm also lucky to have most of you there today as working partners within Track 2. Yes, there is a rise in poverty within Torfaen. Yes, there's been some sad cases and assistance being required with those on universal credit, but there again, we have been there. I don't think there is another council that has, this is my personal view, so many agencies that work together, that refer together. I can go out, I can do an assessment of a need of poverty. I can go through Communities First financial assistance. If a need of identity of mental health, I can go through Communities First, make a referral there. As we appreciate the demand on NHS services with mental health is great. With the services that Community First provide, I was on call out from the 22nd of December to the 2nd of January, when many services are closed for the Christmas holidays. I was out there with food parcels to those that were in desperate need. Food Bank had filled my van for parcels to assist those that had no food. Also, I was there doing gas and electric. Many of them were universal credit. Those I referred on the 2nd of January for further assistance, that was support that was needed, be it financial, mental health. So I do feel as a council and working agencies, we have a good working relationship. On the 2nd of January, I think I put 14 referrals through from the 22nd up to the 2nd of January of identified needs. So I thank you all, personally from myself, for working with us and all working together.
If I could just add to what Sue's just said, I network quite often with colleagues in other citizens' advice bureaus in Wales, and as far as I'm aware, Torfaen is the only council where the council has taken the lead in drawing together the statutory sector and the third sector organisations around the issue of welfare reform. I know of other areas where the third sector have organised such a thing and invited the council to it, but as far as I'm aware, I think Torfaen is the only one in Wales where that lead has been taken at a senior level in the local authority, and I think, you know, I think that's just incredibly welcome, and I think all of us that are involved in it can feel the difference that collaboration is making.
Thank you. Councillor Siebel?
Thank you. I was reminded of payments going to one named member of the household. I'm asking all of you, really, have you seen any difficulties with this? Because thinking on Councillor Daniel's mental health issues, it can be a strain on that one person if they have to deal with those financial issues and debt, let alone if that's not the right person that it's going to, and there are other issues of budgetary issues within the family. So is there a concern amongst any of you that the payment going to one payment member of the family rather than to, you know, the individuals?
I'll jump in quickly. I mean, one particular aspect I still have a residing concern over is that the potential for increased likelihood of domestic abuse, because it going to one particular individual in a couple, it puts the control in the one partner. So I don't have any evidence for this at the moment, but it's the capacity is there, and I don't know. It's for other partners, possibly Women's Aid as well outside of this forum to kind of feed into this to say whether they've seen that particular impact.
Thank you, Councillor Danny. Lady?
Thank you. Picking up on the point about the legacy of universal credit for Torfaen, we've mentioned mental health issues associated, and I would add to that the number of complex cases that come towards our services is very much increasing. So there are other issues such as domestic abuse that are associated with financial hardship, and other really significant layers of needs that our clients are facing. I think with regards to domestic abuse and the monies being paid to one head of the household, certainly there are cases that come through to, for example, our refuge provision across the county and some of our domestic abuse services, where it impinges on the person fleeing domestic abuse ability to leave that setting. So there are services to pick up on that. But where people then have no recourse to public funds is a significant issue for us as local authorities, maybe through homelessness, but similarly with domestic abuse providers as well. So it is another factor of associated directly with universal credit. And I think we can't forget that where a household is facing significant financial hardship, the long-term effect of that, including, for example, rent arrears, lasts for years, and even the ability to pay back those rent arrears. And I think where people have issues maybe accessing universal credit, we sometimes forget that even where we've had a successful universal credit claim, people's circumstances change over the years and they dip in and out of support needs and vulnerability. So it's making sure that the system picks up later on as well.
Hi. I kind of just wanted to pick up on that really. This week, just after Christmas, my team services a children, young people and families support function within Bronavon, and that's just extended a stretch to include multi-agency partners, a number who are here today. And also we administer a hardship fund for our most vulnerable and complex families. What's really interesting is that actually yesterday, and Claire was around the table, that's 100% of applications we receive from partners for hardship crisis support were all domestic violence related and universal credit related. So it's really interesting, isn't it, that we've kind of picked this up already. We're only 6 months into full rollout of the programme, and that's already coming to light. And also it's interesting too, because obviously we work very closely. Just before Christmas we had our hardship panel, and it was for, basics, it was food, warmth, it's 2018 now and we're looking at life basics. They're in non-existence, and we tripled the request for hardship at that crisis level of families have got no money to feed their kids. That is how desperate things are. But things are desperate. We know they're desperate, and we know we can't do this alone. We can't make changes. We can't help our customers alone, and that's why I guess we're all here, is to say we need to be here together. We need to rub away those silo workings. We need to pool resources. We need to look at co-location. My employability team going into Job Centre at the end of February, working with C4W, Communities First, etc., so that we can actually say, we can't do it alone, we're at the table, and we're really putting the customer at the heart of our services. It's tough, we know that, but together, collectively, we can push to make those differences. So, hopefully in 6 months' time we will be able to have another conversation around lessons that we're learning and how we're tightening those relationships so we can make further changes, so we are lessening the hurt, because you can't take that away. You can't take that experience away from our children and people and families of how we are moving forward. So I kind of just wanted to bring that to the table, and hopefully later on I'll have an opportunity just to share with you some of the prevention work that we're doing with our families who are most in need. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment before we carry on. I cannot believe that we are in 2018 and I just heard a statement like that. Councillor Jones first.
Thank you. That's quite good to lead on to what I was going to ask, actually, which is, obviously this is catastrophic, and these things are going to last for years in so many different ways, from mental health of young people to partnership, domestic violence, all sorts of things, as well as everybody's standard of living. I just wondered, it sounds like Torfaen are working so hard in such difficult circumstances and doing great multi-agency work. Have we got a university on board where they are looking at longitudinal studies of everything that's going on and how this is impacting the community? Because I think that would be really important.
Yeah, we haven't at the moment, actually. I think it's a good point. We've had some preliminary conversations. I think in the report there's a reference to a couple of reports that were done by Christine Beattie and Stephen Fothergill, who work at Sheffield Hallam, which is probably the recognised place in terms of research into this type of work, in terms of its impacts. So we've got access to all of their data, in terms of all of their data and all of their projections, if you like, which helped us inform and was quite important at the beginning of the welfare reform story, to just understand why it is that places like Torfaen are probably going to suffer more than some other parts of the UK. And their work, if you haven't looked at it, I think is really interesting in that regard. We haven't developed that relationship yet, because I think, although it's on the table to be developed, but I think one of our challenges in all of this work, and we've picked the words as carefully as we can in the report, so although Lisa was quite rightly saying, well, what we've seen 6 months into it is this, it's very difficult academically to say, actually, we've got all the data that this is caused by the changes in. We've got lots of things that we know will be associated with universal credit, and lots of things that we know are associated and are consequences of individual changes within the welfare system. And we've got lots of data from the projects that we've funded and from the partnership working that we've got. To pull that together academically and say definitively this is the impact in Torvine, I think, is a big piece of work. So we haven't developed that yet. If you as a committee want us to, I'm sure we'd be able to reopen that conversation. But at the moment, we've not funded it and we've not developed it, because I think, to some extent, and this again is a personal view, but it's up for challenge, to some extent, it is what it is. As a result of that, we're not going to see major changes we may not see major changes in the design. To me, it's the design, the policy design of some of this stuff, rather than the local practice. Local practice, I think we are possibly as good as anywhere else. I don't know, that certainly needs to be explored further. But policy design, I think, is creating many of these challenges for us.
In a sense, though, I know it's in the future, and so perhaps in some ways that's not helpful, but in a sense we need to be challenging policy at all levels, don't we, and being able to put things forward. So if we had a research fellow, perhaps, could be picking up certain strands that, because you're at the coalface, you can't pick up. This could be very useful.
I think that's obviously for your consideration as a scrutiny committee, yeah. It's valid, definitely.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Evans and Councillor Molson.
Thank you, Chair. As a question to Richard, really, and some of it you've already explained, Richard. Certainly, it was well accepted, the 40k discretionary allowance, but unfortunately it's going to be a one-off, and I wonder whether that will come around again in crisis. What I wanted to ask you, Richard, was, since the introduction of universal credit, what issues have you come up to that you didn't expect, and how did you deal with them? And one of the issues you did mention as well was the trained staff dealing with vulnerable claimants. How is that working out? Have you got enough staff trained in that situation?
Thanks for that question. I think the issue that we've experienced with vulnerable people, some of the health problems have been described. We weren't expecting around digital support in particular, but these are people who are frustrated with the system, have difficulty in using perhaps online processes and filling in online forms. With assistance, they are able to do some of it themselves. But we did not have an expectation of what the issues were with those particular clients, with those particular customers. But we have developed a protocol now with the DWP whereby we have more background information on each customer so that we're prepared for what might come up in an interview. And we can choose the setting and the nature of that interview as a result of it. I think I would underline the point that I made at the outset about universal credit. I've worked in welfare benefits, local government for quite a long time. This is by far the most difficult, and I deal with changes all the time. Housing benefit changes are very regular. But this is by far the most difficult piece of administration I've had to deal with. And perhaps the most ill thought out piece of policy design, as Dave puts it, that has been inflicted upon us. I think those issues are being addressed now by DWP, and as I say, I welcome that. But I did not expect the number of vulnerable people that we have had to be going through universal credit. I would underline that. Some people with very complex needs indeed. And the numbers of those customers in particular.
Thank you, Richard.
Chair, thank you for that, Richard. Obviously, there are people in vulnerable situations that are losing more money than possibly other areas.
Yeah, we've had cases where customers have struggled with, for example, issues around verification and the online form. In terms of producing information that's required by DWP. We've had cases where customers haven't read their journals and to-do lists and not kept up to date with whatever the DWP requirements were. So as a result, their claims have lapsed. They've had to reclaim. We've had to talk to our partnership managers about reopening those claims. But ultimately, at that particular point in time, they've had no money. So we've had to point them in the direction of where they can access help, food banks, etc., and actually provide them with money utility cards, discretionary housing payments, so that they can subsist until the universal credit claim is sorted out. And that's the situation we've been in through this period.
Can I just add, sorry, no, that's fine, I think it's really helpful actually. Can I just add one further point to that? Because I think the point you were getting at, Councillor Evans, is to sort of say, you know, and it's in the report, universal credit and welfare reform has a different impact on different groups in society, and that's nothing that we, you know, nothing that's in anybody's gift in this room. What's in our gift, I think, as a welfare reform project group, provided that the leadership of it through the executive member is right, and in my view it's absolutely spot on, is that we're able to identify which groups and we're able to do something about it. So you mentioned about, and Richard mentioned about, for example, seeing a higher level of vulnerability than you would normally expect. Earlier on, it's not a universal credit issue, so just bear with me, but I think universal credit is built on everything else, isn't it? So early on in the Welfare Reform Project Group's life, we did a piece of work particularly around those people who are affected by the medical reassessment processes. So there are a couple of those going on, and Mal can comment in as much detail as you want. Our view as a Welfare Reform Project Group was that actually, if people are not well advised and they are already very vulnerable and they're already facing some very significant changes to both disability levelling allowance and ESA claims. I mean, you know, I'm mindful of some of the people that I've looked at in terms of case studies, and I've met a couple of people who are deemed fit for work, in inverted commas, under some of those assessment processes. And without challenge and support, you do very quickly get large groups of people who find their way into the wrong part of the welfare reform system, which I think is what you're getting to. Unless we get people well advised at the beginning of this change, and we've invested quite heavily through the executive members' leadership of it in the CAB, because, you know, that's the point at which you can ensure that people find the right part of the system. So if they're not fit for work, that is a huge difference to their ability and their lifestyle going forward, as opposed to leaving that judgment unchallenged and unsupported. I don't know whether, Mal, you wanted to comment perhaps on some of the work we've expanded with you and around the medical reassessment stuff particularly, but anything that you think might add to that understanding.
Yes, I can start. I'm so well done. In the first couple of months, our experience at Universal Credit, quite small numbers. And the characteristic then is we're dealing with the initial claim, lots of people going through the initial claim, and there were lots of errors and some misinformation and some delays. Now, Richard reported that by and large, a lot of those have been smoothed out, and it is a testament to the team and the way that everyone's working together that's happened. To support what's been said earlier, one of the things I noticed in our report on October, November and December is that people who have self-declared to us that they have a mental health issue is much higher under Universal Credit than it is for the total number of clients that we support. So 21% of the total number of clients that we support generally, and that's 30% if you just take the cut for those with Universal Credit issues. So I think there is something in this about it disproportionately impacting on people with mental health issues. The investment that Torvine Council have made into our services, we've had for some time a service which specialises in helping people appeal against decisions that impact against their disability benefit, and we are probably 2/3 of our benefit work is appealing against PIP and employment support allowance decisions. We do enormous amounts of work in that area, and I think without that additional support there would be we've been swamped with those kind of inquiries, to be fair, and I think other agencies that provide that service, there's some in Mellin, and some of the Disability Advice Project have also been swamped. I think at one point we were looking at a 5-week waiting list to assist people with that. So that additional help has been very welcome. I suppose the other thing that I would say about Universal Credit is we're only just starting to see the hardship impacts that have been caused by the lower entitlements to some of the benefits for some classes of people, mainly families and people who lose the severe disability premium if they've transitioned from ESA to universal credit. We're only just starting to see the first examples of that hardship being caused. The hardship that we've seen most so far has been caused by the waiting days. It's been caused by the wait, the month-long wait, and or some other administrative problems that have caused that to take longer. And I think going forward, we're much more likely to be looking at the impact of the fact that, I think what Dave Congreve started off by saying, this is a less generous benefit. And we're not really, I don't think, started to really deal with the cumulative impact of that yet. And I think that's further down the line. And I think that will manifest itself in people falling deeper into debt, rent arrears, and need for budgeting skills and so on. So I think that's likely to take over from these initial issues as the benefit matures.
Thank you, Mark. Mike?
Hi there. I just want to give a quick kind of summary, just a quick summary of kind of the impact on Brian Avon from my perspective, because it touched on a couple of points that have been mentioned already. So personally, I kind of agree with the principles of universal credit in terms of giving people the opportunity to have the money and manage their own money and distribute that how they see fit. I understand the principles of that. What I disagree with the savings that's trying to be made through it, and actually people losing money because of trying to make cuts to the welfare state. The impact on us has been, yes, we've seen an increase in arrears, and again, people have mentioned how that's attributable, and I can echo that most of that is attributable to that first period of time where people are lacking money, don't have the money to be able to pay the rent that we expect, and that those arrears that's accrued in that first period of time, it does take 1.5 to 2 years to be able to claw back. So, it does push people into financial hardship for a good couple of years. Positive has been, though, from my perspective, that actually most people do pay once they receive their money, which was a concern going into universal credit. We thought there'd be other pressures on people, but most people, in our experience, when they do receive their benefit, do pass it on. The policy changes that are coming up in April, okay, great. The extra 2 weeks in terms of housing benefit, the 100% advance payments that are now in place, and being able to recoup over 12 months, that's fine. That's obviously steps in the right direction, but that doesn't help the 566 people that we've currently got claiming universal credit that are Brian Avon tenants. So my worry is for them in terms of how great for the changes with new people going into it post-April, but the people who are currently on it, what's the impact going to be to them and for how long? I think there's still more to be done in terms of policy changes, but also system changes. So, we've talked a lot about vulnerable people, and the alternative payments arrangement, APAs, should be the ideal solution to try and help those people who are vulnerable and unable to manage their own finances. However, because of the problems with that system at the moment in how it's delivered, it sometimes causes people more issues. It causes us more issues as well. So I think that's one thing that needs to be looked at in terms of sorting out how APAs are actually delivered and paid. I know that's more of a something further up the line, but it's just disappointing to hear that kind of that's been deprioritised to implement the changes coming in April. Which is a shame. My personal view is why didn't they just stop everything for a bit and not expand out into other local authorities and just get it right in the authorities we're in full service with at the moment before it can be rolled out everywhere else and use the resources that way. But there we are. I think from my perspective, one big issue at the moment is around rent increases coming up towards the end of the year. Whereas under housing benefit we'd supply a schedule saying these are all our properties, these are the increases or decreases in rent, please can you apply them to the housing benefit. Under the new system we're going to have to write to everybody, say this is your increase or decrease. They're expected then to go into their own portal to update that rent information before they'll receive the benefit they're entitled to. So if people don't do that within the right timescales, it could be that people miss out on the benefit they're entitled to come April, May time. In addition to that, it could cause us more work because we could be having more notifications to inputs. There's more administration work from our perspective as well. So I think that's a big issue that needs to be looked at. And then around communication as well, and you know, the landlord portal has been, you know, mentioned, and that should hold a lot of information for us. So I think actually there's some more work to be done in terms of making sure that gets rolled out to everybody who's on full service at the moment, because there's tenants there where if we had access to some information, we might be able to help them further. And also the development of the portal itself needs to be a focus. Having said all that, you know, we know there's kind of issues with the system. There's been some positives with it as well. It's not all bad news. But I think here, it's been mentioned a few times already, is that the local multi-agency approach is what is mitigating the risk at the moment. And I talk to other partners, you know, across the country in England and Wales, and nowhere seems to have the same type of relationships as we've got, which I think that's, you know, a real positive thing. Is the links that's been created to kind of help people with their support. And on that point, I mean, from my perspective, there's two issues. We've got one which is hardship that is being caused directly through reduced, through cuts and reduced levels of benefit. You know, disabled households, a prime example of that, where actually they're just receiving less money regardless of what system it's in. So that's on one hand. But then the other hand is those people who we've now identified, maybe through this, and perhaps it's a positive thing, that maybe that support need has always been there. You know, people who have struggled with budgeting, you know, people who are just generally vulnerable, domestic violence being highlighted. So perhaps some of these issues have always actually been there, but universal credit has kind of teased those to the surface, which I think is actually a positive thing. So although it's having, you know, a lot of impact on our workloads around the table, you know, I think actually, you know, that's perhaps a positive thing, that actually the support need is highlighted now, so that can start to be filled.
Thank you very much. Richard?
Thank you. Just to echo some of Mike's comments, really, obviously I'm aware of the concerns around the landlord portal, and Mike's colleague Ian Simpson, him and I have been in some conversation that there is a bit of frustration to the delay in Bronavon and a number of other housing associations having access to the landlord portal. I did raise that concern at a meeting I attended just before Christmas with Welsh Government and local authority agencies, where I had sight of the portal itself to see how it actually works. But the rollout schedule was a national schedule, focusing on, frustratingly, not looking at the areas that rolled out universal credit, but actually looking at the larger scale housing associations first. Now, obviously, Bronavon is a significant one in Torfaen, but actually it's quite small in comparison to others across the country. So I've raised those concerns because it does put Wales at a disadvantage because of geography. So, you know, take on board that, and, you know, we are looking into that to make sure that housing associations in Wales, you know, get that access to that landlord portal as quickly as possible. And additionally, obviously following the budget announcement back in the autumn, we did actually postpone a number of universal credit full service rollout schedules. So Blaenau Gwent and Monmouthshire were shortly due to go live in March and April, and we actually postponed that to June and July respectively, and that's not just those two boroughs, but, you know, across the UK, because we need to make changes to the system to embed some of the budget announcements. So we have paused rollout. Cardiff will go live in February as previously expected, because it was too far into the programme to delay that. But to make sure that we get those key changes right, we've actually postponed a number of rollouts across the country.
Thank you, Richard.
Just to pick up on that point, the rollouts have been postponed. I mean, I deal with Monmouthshire as well as Torfaen, responsible for their benefit service, and the fact that that rollout has been delayed from March until June is very, very welcome. But in Torfaen, we're having to deal with the old scheme, with the consequences of perhaps what we started off with in July, Richard. And, you know, I don't know whether it would be really welcome if the Department for Work and Pensions made some recognition of the fact, the sort of things that are being raised around the table in terms of the impacts here. We've played some part in improving universal credit, but we've also been a test bed for it, and our residents have had to face the consequences of it. And as we've said, those consequences could go on for some time. So would there be some recognition, sorry to ask across, but I think it is pertinent, some recognition of that fact?
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Mawson?
Going back to Lisa with poverty in 2018, totally agree with you. We shouldn't be at this, but we are, and we're all dealing with it. Going back to the Christmas period where you're mentioning families, a referral came from your, excuse me, from Bronhaven. There was 4 families out there, 10 children. We're all us together, and the community out there made a Christmas for all of them. So we have community support. We have all us that's working together to support. So just think how many we're outreaching to, how many needs are identified via poverty, gas, electric, the food bank, financial, debt, mental health. What if we 1 year? Where would they be? So each and every one of us need to be thanking each other and praising each other on the residents in Torfaen that we are outreaching to, we are uplifting. That's what we do, and we'll continue. Forward planning, we thought of this 2 years ago with Universal Credit. We've been working together, especially with citizen advice. We knew what was coming our way, so that's why we do what we do, and we are good at what we are doing because we forward planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just echo what Richard was saying, I think we are different in Torfaen in the sense for all those positive reasons, but I think the fact of the matter is we are living with a legacy of a system that was imposed upon us. Now, I think it would be a really helpful thing if the scrutiny committee wanted. We've got very good relationships with DWP at every level. I'd emphasise that. I think they're a very willing organisation, and it might be useful to use your influence as a scrutiny committee just to push that a little bit further and explore the types of issues that Richard said. Is there anything practically that at a senior level, the DWP, I'm very happy with their relationship with the DWP. If we take exceptions there, they're very keen to resolve it. And obviously at a practice level, Richard's a very well embedded member of our partnership. But I think the point Richard's making is, consequentially, we're going to live in this area with a different legacy to those areas that haven't had this system put on them. At the moment, the council, for all the reasons that you've just sort of said, is being very positive because of the leadership of the executive and the decisions that are taken. But that is actually a set of costs that are imposed on us locally that maybe need a little bit of exploration as to whether there could be something, given our special circumstances in terms of the legacy, that is worth further exploring at a senior level. So that might be something that you wish to pick up in your recommendations.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether everybody's aware that a motion went through Council just before Christmas about universal credit, and one of my bullet points was the overall level of universal credit is funded. The way it's funded needs to be urgently increased. The rate at which claimants will lose benefit is set at 63 pence in the pound. And compared to the top rate of interest, income tax, that's not very fair because it obviously affects the lowest paid benefit receivers in our country. I think Dave's point is actually really pertinent. We should actually be, what I've asked the DWP Pensions Minister in my motion is to actually delay the rollout, but we perhaps could look at inserting a point about Torfaen actually having to play catch up and actually giving us some help on rolling out the old universal credit as well as the other. My question is, obviously as chair of a large comprehensive school, how do we ensure that pupils in schools still have free school meals when their parents are in the process of going through this application? We've noticed a drop in free school meals, and percentage-wise across our schools there's a drop, and now there's an increase. So whether it's because the universal credit is feeding through, lots of schools depend on their grants for their percentage of free school meals, and it affects all sorts of different areas. So that's my point on.
I wish to comment on this at the end, if I may. My service took over administration of free school meals in July, alongside the implementation of universal credit. Because we deal with housing benefit and council tax reduction and a multiplicity of other things, we're able to cross-check across systems. So when somebody claims council tax reduction, universal credit, we ensure they also claim free school meals at the same time. In the past, that was a separate process. So as a consequence, the take-up of free school meals has gone up by 12%.
Yeah.
And we're still working on that. We're conscious that there's a 31st of January deadline in terms of council funding for future years. And so we're actually being proactive in contacting households at the moment to make sure that they're claiming the free school meals that they're entitled to. It has been underclaimed in the past, but hopefully not anymore.
So my comment on it is twofold, really, in terms of your scrutiny. I think, first thing, they won't like it, but I think it's huge credit to the Revs and Bens team for picking that piece of work up. It's a problem that we've been wrestling with for a while, and clearly the answer to it is to ensure that it's done by a part of the organisation that sees the whole circumstances, not just those that present in a school setting. So I think there's that. I think that the benefit to us corporately, and this illustrates, I think, the importance of the partnerships work, although this is very clearly a Revs and Bens issue. The benefit to us corporately is huge in terms of the sorts of issues that Councillor Seaburns talked about in terms of ensuring that both the contextualisation of school results is done in the right context, and also that the funding that flows for pupils, as well as, obviously, the huge benefit that has for families that are entitled to something that they may not have been getting through a systems through us not operating as effectively as we now know that we can do. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, though, illustrates a point that is really pertinent to your partnership working, and that is actually we've designed something in the Welfare Reform Project Group that does more than what it says on the tin. So what it says on the tin is it tackles and mitigates welfare reform. Well, clearly, welfare reform, the sorts of issues you've just been talking about, are not just related to welfare reform. People have difficult circumstances for a whole range of reasons. Your corporate plan priorities about supporting vulnerable individuals, some of the work the PSB needs to do, the only way in which you will do that effectively as a council, as a set of public service organisations, is to have a very strong network of well-informed, well-engaged partners. So whilst that's done under the guise of the Welfare Reform Project Group, many of the things you will want to address involve the same agencies working in the same way. So I think in lots of ways, I know that's one specific example, but it's a very good illustration of what happens when you bring together the appropriate people, when you infuse the appropriate people, and when you lead them, as the executive members done in this occasion, in the right way on a multitude of things that have been a problem for quite a while in Torvine. So I think it's a really nice illustration of what you're trying to get to, which is actually, are we doing something a little bit above and beyond in Torvine? And certainly I think you're getting a flavour for how many of us feel about our work here.
Thank you. Councillor James?
Yes, I'd just like to say that we know about all the poverty and the struggling of the applicants themselves, but what you've got to realise, the struggling goes and the stress goes a lot further than that. It's their parents, it's the grandparents. They're all suffering from stress. I know on a number, grandfather taking out a loan to make sure the grandkids don't starve because they haven't got a penny for 6 weeks. I know they've taken loans out, you know, and so it's not just the applicant themselves that are suffering, it's their family, their friends, giving them everything they had when they didn't even have a lot themselves. So, you know, without everybody here that helps this situation, it's just absolutely amazing that we can all work together. And I said, and it's a shame that Oliver Twist didn't have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones?
Going back to the multi-agency working, I think it's fabulous that we're doing such a good job, but I'm horrified that we're in 2018 and we seem to have had this imposed on us, perhaps from the very richest in society, and we've done some great they've done some great social engineering now to put such pressure on those in the middle and at the bottom of the pile. And I just wondered, for those people working at the cliff face, in DWP, all of you, in the multi-agency arena, have you noticed sick rates going up? Is stress a lot worse? How has that impacted on everybody working in this awful arena, as well as those poor people who are, trying their hardest to live?
Can I just comment on that? I do think that there probably has been an increase. I can only talk from the point of view of my own department. Claire, yeah? I think there probably has been an increase in a little bit of stress, and certainly there's been a great deal of concern about individual cases. But and I don't want to be cheesy about this, but it is we are in public service for a reason, and in actual fact, the fact that we are able to deal with specific cases and help people, does make you feel good about your role and what you're doing. Ultimately, it's a very difficult situation, probably worse than other difficult situations we've dealt with in the past, but it is a legislative change, it's a benefit change that's been brought in by the government. There'll be other changes and difficulties that we have to deal with in the future, but as public servants we still have to deal with them, get on with the job and support our residents as best we can.
Just to pick up on that point, I think that is a valid point. I think certainly from the housing department, I'm thinking in particular around homelessness. I think the level of cases that are coming through, the complexity of the cases coming through, and the frustration of officers working with a system such as Universal Credit, and how we're working with our clients and trying to prevent homelessness in the first instance, and where we are accommodating people in temporary accommodation, things like the delay in universal credit claims, the amount of resources that we need as a local authority and as partners to try and support those households, very vulnerable households, is a massive increase. And I think, for housing officers, not just homelessness officers, there's a real frustration. And I think everybody's trying to do the right thing for the client and the household, but this sort of hampers some of those efforts. And I think more generally speaking, I suppose it's around how we work to make sure that housing is still affordable for certain households. And I think working with our RSL partners in particular and other support services such as CAB and so, that's a massive conundrum for us in how we make sure that we can get people into affordable housing and that we've got the resources to do so when people maybe have rent arrears. And who picks up the tab there? So picking up on the point around the legacy, there is a big resource tail to us being one of the first piloting local authorities with Universal Credit. New authorities coming on board who may not have the 7-week delay, will not have the 2 weeks housing benefit, won't have the resource costs tail that we've got in Torvine. And I don't know how we square that peg. But for all of us, we've got the actual costs associated with it as well, and for the households themselves. Because essentially, certain households we will fund and have to look to how we can offset things like rent arrears so that we can move them into appropriate, affordable housing.
No? I suppose to do that. I think I've probably got, about 14 or 15 paid advisors and caseworkers at our bureau in Cwmbran and in Pontypool. And they have certainly noticed the pressure, particularly those working on the benefit side, who won't turn anybody away because they have the same lived experiences as a lot of our clients, and they won't see somebody going short. So they're actually taking on caseloads that will become unmanageable at some point. But I'd also like to talk about the experience of the volunteers. We have about 25 volunteers who work on the advice side, and what they are experiencing is people who are more and more desperate. And a year or so ago, the number of people that would have said to us or said to a volunteer in that initial interview, I feel like ending it all, I can't cope anymore, would have been comparatively rare. It's now probably 2, 3, 4 a month. We've noticed a significant increase, and so have other citizens of vice bureaus around Wales that I talk to. But that's something that we've probably not reported before, but that's a pressure that our volunteer force are bearing. We didn't used to have a protocol to deal with this. We had to put one in place fairly quickly, and we worked with some other agencies to develop that. But that's certainly a growing feature of the work that our volunteers particularly do, because it's generally our volunteers who are on the front line, and it's generally our staff advisors who are getting the referrals from our front line. So certainly that's something we've noticed.
Thank you. Councillor Daniels?
We're on, since Elco's on housing, I don't know whether it's worth maybe talking about the impact on private landlords and their likelihood to rent out to people in receipt of UC, because I think there's been a trend elsewhere in councils in England where it has made them less likely to take on the risk of renting out to UC claimants, and subsequently put pressure on RSLs or councils that own their stock, and basically making housing unaffordable and inaccessible to the poorest. So I don't know if Elka's got any more information. I might be putting you on the spot, I don't know.
I suppose for us, one of the reprieves around the welfare reforms that the members may be aware of is that local housing allowance rates are no longer going to apply to social housing and supported housing. So rents being capped, or housing benefit or universal credit housing costs being capped at a lower rate. We still operate in the private rented sector with welfare reform local housing allowance rates being applied to private sector renting. In Wales, we've made some really good policy decisions, and we've moved towards the registration of private landlords, as members will be aware, and local lettings agents. So we're getting to grips more with knowing who those landlords are. But we have done numbers of surveys we've got a landlord forum that we share with Monmouthshire. We've done a number of surveys over the years with private landlords around their appetite or their inclination to work with households to accommodate households who are on benefits. And I know we're doing a piece of work led by Councillor Daniels again to revisit that situation. But stereotypically, we're hearing, there was an exercise undertaken across Wales which looked at whether private landlords are happy accommodating people who are on benefits, and in particular looking at, I suppose, for us, the implication, because we're an early user of universal credit full service, are our private landlords quite happy to accommodate tenants who are in receipt of universal credit? That's one of our areas of work that we need to continue to develop, because the housing sector in Torfaen, we have, I'll say that, I've said this before and I'll say it again, we all hear on the news about the housing crisis. That housing crisis is here in Torfaen. It's happening across Wales, it's happening across the UK. We haven't got enough social housing and affordable housing in Torfaen. We typically get 50, 60 bids per property that comes through our social housing stock, so our colleagues in Bronavon, Melyn, etc. We are reliant upon the private rented sector to help us accommodate people. We had the legislative change with the Housing Wales Act, where we can even now accommodate homeless households in the private rented sector. So it's really pertinent for us to not only work with our social landlords, but also our private rented sector landlords. And one of our roles, I suppose, is to try and dispel the myths that people who are claiming benefits are going to be poor tenants or bad tenants. So there's work through Councillor Daniels' role in terms of Cabinet Member for Housing as well that we're undergoing. And that's another area that we need to continue to work on that theme as well. So it doesn't really answer the question in terms of where we know at this current moment in time what private rented sector landlords' engagement and willingness to accommodate tenants on universal credit. What I can say is we've got some key private sector landlords which we work with very closely who are very willing to accommodate people on benefits and people with universal credit, and I'm thinking in particularly, for example, through the homelessness service of the council. But we need to make sure that we dispel some of the myths around people who are claiming universal credit being bad or poor tenants, and we need to make sure that the support services that we have at our disposal are there ready and waiting to engage with tenants in private sector properties as and when. So I don't know whether that really answers the question, but it tries to put a bit of a picture on where we're at.
Thank you. Richard? Thank you. Just coming back to the comments the Councillor made around, some of the scenarios that colleagues of mine certainly have found themselves in late. I'm a public servant. I've been in the civil service for 22 plus years, joining film school, and I'm really proud of the work that I do on a daily basis. And likewise, I can assure you all my colleagues in both the job centres in Torfaen are extremely proud of the service that they provide. I'd encourage you all, if you would like to come in and spend some time shadowing some of my colleagues, you'd be more than welcome to do that, so you can really get first-hand experience of the services that we deliver and some of the cases that we deal with. Much like Richard said, we deal with some really vulnerable cases. I'm not sure if you're aware of the awful incident that took place in Ebervale office back in November that was on the news earlier this week, where one of the customers was brandishing a knife in the job centre, and I was there that day, and that was an awful experience, and none of us are paid to have to be in that situation. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But what is, again, coming back to sort of the multi-agency approach, what it's led us to do is I've encouraged now as part of our incident management process that if we ever experience anything like that, and touch wood, hopefully we never have to experience anything like that again, that we make urgent contact with Richard and other key stakeholders, that if a member of the public is acting in such an awful way, that we ensure that we keep our other stakeholders safe. And that's now been included in Fine y Gwent and Torfaen incident management plans. We're sure we're really proud public servants, and we want to do the best for our community. So all of you are more than welcome if you want to spend some time with myself and colleagues in job centres. We'd welcome that. You can really get an understanding then of the services that we deliver. One of the comments in the report, and I totally take this on board. We do hear about some of the awful cases and the vulnerability of some of our constituents. But I assure you, there's some really great work that goes on, and personally, I know that we don't celebrate that enough, and we should be sharing more of those good cases where we have actually transformed people's lives, from being in poverty to actually moving them closer to the labour market, to into sustained employment. And that really changes people's lives, and ultimately, that's what we're there to do in the job centre. The staff really welcome the changes Universal Credit has brought, because they're able to deal with some really vulnerable people. We used to be called advisors, we now call work coaches, but each interview is different. It can, every customer has a different set of circumstances, and it's about what can we do with that particular intervention to remove barriers to support that individual. As their house burnt down, how do we react to that? Who do we engage with to make sure that customer has the right support? Something I'm involved in as a side of this is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Valley's Task Force Manifesto paper. My senior leader, Fiona Jones, who's the Director for Wales, has asked me to lead on a piece of work around the community hub approach, and that's something that it won't influence all of the job centres in Wales because of the catchment area of the Valley's Task Force, but something I'm looking to foster is that community hub approach in job centres, because what we don't have is an awful lot of budget, but what we do have is an awful lot of premise. So, I'm trying to ensure that, key stakeholders deliver their services from the job centre, so customers can access the services they need when they see a work coach. They can then have a warm handover to, their RSL or money advice service. Richard and I have had some discussions around perhaps implementing personal budgeting and assisted digital support in the job centre. So it's that seamless transition, because a warm handover from a work coach to, a partner is much more successful than saying, you need to go up the street, turn right, and go and see them on Tuesday next week at 11 o'clock, because that engagement can be lost because of the chaotic lifestyles that they lead. But that warm handover approach where we can take the customer 2 desks down to that stakeholder works really well. And again, that's something I'm trying to encourage that we do more of in Torfaen. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. One question I'd like to ask is there more we can do to improve the financial literacy and help residents to improve how they look after their money, which could be combined with another one here? What are we doing as a council to increase awareness and education of universal credit via social media, roadshows, etc.?
I'll ask Emma to come in a second on the second bit about awareness and possibly even on the first bit, I think, around financial education. So I think one of the things that we talked about earlier on, and it's the point at which we try and do some of this work, I think there's a whole thing around probably, maybe at a much wider population level than just those affected by universal credit. Actually, financial literacy is a core living skill that actually many people don't acquire until quite late and quite painfully. So I think there is something about the wider education role in there as well. I think in terms of mitigating circumstances for people facing those challenges and trying to work at that point, I've made mention of the financial inclusion team that we've now funded through the early intervention and prevention stuff. Emma, did you want to comment on that more specifically, and then possibly on the work that you've done particularly around communications and coordinating the awareness campaigns?
Okay, in terms of the communications, prior to the rollout of universal credit, as was already been touched upon by partners in the room, we did plan in advance as to how we would tackle this issue. So there was a lot of awareness raising among frontline practitioners, anybody and everybody who might come into contact with somebody who has been asked to make a claim for universal credit. So that includes social workers, that includes health staff, that includes all of our frontline workers working in family support and community support generally. And then alongside that, there's been a need to raise awareness amongst our communities to let them know that there is help available. So we came up with a campaign which has been labelled Nifty Thrifty Torfaen, and you will occasionally see e-bulletins come out through our communications team, which consolidates a lot of information around what is available to people. Through that, we've done things like consolidated a programme of digital support across the borough. So we found out exactly where people can drop in for digital advice and support, and we've put that in a comprehensive timetable that covers Blenavon, Pontypool, Cwmbran. So there's lots of things where we're trying to get as much information preventatively if possible, so that if people know that this kind of thing is coming, they can access those things in advance. So that is ongoing, and that will continue to ongo. In terms then of what was the first part of the question? You just remind me. You wanted me to talk about financial inclusion teams in the EIP.
Is there more we can do to help people I'm paraphrasing it, is there more we can do to help people in terms of financial inclusion literacy, if you like? I guess that's...
So we've invested heavily already in our frontline financial inclusion teams, and we've extended that recently with more investment into CAB, investment into disability advice projects in terms of universal credit caseworker, more investment into TRAC and our ongoing financial inclusion. And my role is very much to make sure that we bring those resources together and we encourage them to collaborate. So we're maximising our support to those out there in our communities, and that includes increasing people's financial literacy. The personal budget stuff, the personal budgeting support that Richard's team offers goes alongside a whole range of other bits and pieces that is ongoing. And I've seen Mal's hands up. He's probably going to mention the Good With Money project, which is one of the things that we funded, which is support for families who are struggling with financial literacy and their own personal budgeting. They will now receive a bespoke package of support to really help them look at how they budget. So there's more and more of that stuff being put out there, avoiding duplication of services. There really is so much need that we do need more and more of this stuff, and we have such a good network of partners that there's people aren't working with the same people, is what I'm trying to say. All of that stuff's being maximised.
Supplementary for Malcolm's is if somebody doesn't come forward and tell you they got problems, is there any way anywhere you can know that they're in financial difficulty? Is anybody going to pick up on it?
One example of that was just before Christmas. So our teams on the front line, we should be really, really proud of them. They're extremely proactive. And just before Christmas, we were aware that some people would be affected by the waiting period during December and would be without money over Christmas. So Revs and Benefits and our Communities First team got together and proactively targeted those people with information they had through their own systems and through TWP to identify them and support them so that they wouldn't have that period of hardship. And there's a lot of that goes on. And we try, yes, we have engagement issues, but we've got frontline staff out there in all sorts of places to try and capture that. We've got a programme of workforce development which educates all of our frontline staff to look holistically at people. So if somebody comes in for parenting support, well, don't just talk to them about the parenting, let's find out if there's anything else that goes on. So hopefully there's not many people that slip through the net. There's that proactive engagement.
The reason I asked was because earlier Councillor Balsam said that they were very proactive over the New Year. Want to add anything to that, Councillor Balsam?
Obviously, I work a lot with many of you sat around the table there today. Some of us were aware coming up to the Christmas period and looked ahead of what could possibly be happening. And so we had put actions into motion. Trust to Trust Food Bank, like I said, they closed on the Friday and they wouldn't be open till the following Friday. They had contacted me because it was put out there that I would be on call to assist with food over the Christmas holidays. So they filled the van up with food packages. Also, agencies that are out there on working over the Christmas and holiday period were asked, with emergency assistance with temporary accommodation, were any clients going into emergency temporary accommodation? We were assured that they weren't, so that was a great help knowing that no assistance was needed there. But also via my other role within Track 2 Charity, Track 2 Charity is well known with the agencies that it works with and the assistance that it provides. Gas and electric was put out there. Yes, it was through those that were suffering through universal credit, waiting for the next payment. Also, if I'd been called out on calls for a food parcel, gas and electric, I was able to identify other needs, reassure that person that more assistance when all agencies, supporting agencies opened up on the 2nd of Jan, they would be addressed. And so with Track 2 Charity, we're out there, we work confidentiality, people trust us, and then when they've given that permission to myself or to a member of my staff to refer them on, I'm so pleased that with the agencies that I work with, that they take this forward. One case, mental health appointment was made within 5 days, as it was classed as urgent. So, and I thank the Communities First team for doing that, and Dave Congreve with your team. Also, identification of debt out there. Not always the case of universal credit. We're also dealing with families on low income. So it's not always universal credit. You know, when you've got families on low income that can't afford Christmas, can't afford the turkey, can't afford the food. With the agencies that I work with and the donations and support of other groups, we're able to do that out there. So yet again, yes, I was on call, but that was through my choice. But I made other agencies aware of the fact that I was around. And I'm just so thankful that they spread the word, and all the ones that were attended to over the Christmas period and the New Year were assisted via food, gas, electric, and referrals I made on the 2nd of January.
I think we've all very grateful for the work you do behind the scenes and, like you say, confidentiality. Mal?
Yeah, just quickly, the Good With Money project that we put forward in response to the early intervention and prevention funds that the council made available, we just started taking referrals for it. It's aimed at families who are in crisis. So the initial intervention will be some casework around benefits, debt, and potentially housing casework so that they keep their home. But also follow-ups over a period of months, helping that household design a budget and with financial information and education, tips and techniques, hopefully to make that family more resilient in the future. It's the first time we've been able to do sort of long-term work on this basis. We thought there was a need for it, and we're going to be very interested to see whether there's a much greater impact through that approach. So we'll be reporting on that, in due course as the project starts to develop some outputs.
Councillor Daniels?
Right, so just want to come back to Richard's earlier sort of comments, really. I mean, the offer for working in the job centre for a day, I think I'll take you up on that. I think that would be very helpful. So I think it seems on the surface a bit symbolic, but I think the change from advisor to work coach is actually an important one, because I think it's a reflection. I'm hoping that's a reflection on an acknowledgement that not everybody's starting from the same place. So people are starting from often more complex, and they might be complex situations. They might be a million miles away from work. So that approach I welcome. And I know that and again, I think it's important to reiterate locally, the DWP are very amenable, and they do listen, and they do try and change where they can. And I think hopefully Richard and the team will recognise that many of the gripes we've got, if we're going to call them gripes, are on a national scale. And I think on that, I think we're missing a bit of a trick, really, or the country's missing a bit of a trick on the welfare system, because I think so people turn to the welfare system in need of help. So they've lost their job, they can't find a job, they're ill, disabled, range of reasons, so they need help, they need support. So that initial period when they're going to seek for help, I think, is an absolutely crucial one. That is where it makes a difference between them being resilient and bouncing back in terms of self-confidence, self-esteem, and being in a more conducive mental condition, financial condition to get straight back into work. And I'm worried that at the moment it's not really doing that. I'm worried that some of the aspects of it nationally, I think, are precipitating a worsening financial situation for individuals and their families, mental health conditions for individuals and their families, and it's pushing them further away from. And I understand you can't. It's difficult for you on this. It's pushing them further away, ironically, pushing them further away from the likelihood of getting back into work. So I personally view the welfare system as being a potentially very good preventative service for making sure that when somebody loses their job, they're not falling from here to here, they're falling from here to here, and this helps them bounce back up to this level. So it's quite a frustration from my part, really, and in working with your team, I think, for a day, I think it would help just to understand what we're doing locally, because that's what we've got controls over, and all we can do really beyond that is just lobby to say you need to be putting more money into the welfare system, you need to be paying from day one, not having a waiting period, because I think that waiting period is leading to people being less resilient and, ironically, being less likely to get back into work. So it's a bit of a rant, but it is frustrating because we're in touching distance of this being something decent that actually might be able to help people.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come in briefly, it's going back to Emma's information she provided earlier. We're doing everything we can through the media process. Particularly, I wanted to specify what we're doing with the roadshows, because it's a good place to start a conversation. We've had evidence of that in the past when we rolled out our skinny bins, and I think it's worthwhile doing roadshows. Have you any thoughts on that, Emma?
Roadshows have been suggested a few times. We haven't taken it forward in specifically in relation to universal credit or to welfare. What the general feedback from frontline staff was that people won't often come forward if we did a universal credit roadshow. So there's been a number of other activities where welfare advice is available. So one example of that would be there's a lot of work going on between employability support and primary care and the NHS around long-term health conditions, specifically fibromyalgia. We had an event back in September. There's a repeat one this month where we invite people in, we target people specifically with long-term health conditions, but they don't just come to that event for advice on their health condition, they come for advice on everything. Because we take, as a partnership, a social approach to health, that all of this other stuff is having an impact on people. So we've built that kind of roadshow concept into other things that we do, rather than inviting people who are already vulnerable, who are already disengaged and struggling, perhaps not wanting to come forward to something which is openly a universal credit session.
In a nutshell, you don't want to do roadshows.
Thanks, Chair. Picking up on financial inclusion or exclusion, whichever way we want to term it, probably a few years ago through the Welfare Reform Project Group, one of the themes of work was looking at the provision of financial inclusion type services across the county. So that piece of work was undertaken by the Welfare Reform Project Group, which led to a financial inclusion strategy, which Torfaen Cabinet signed off, which was supported by the Public Service Board. And I suppose the trick for us is picking up on the point that there are sometimes those who will not approach a service until it's crisis point, and how do we mitigate that? So I suppose some of the approach we've taken is recognising that there are a whole range of programmes and services across the county that are available to Torfaen citizens if they face some sort of financial hardship. So what we tried to do through a more strategic approach is try and align those services so that whether it's a third sector mental health provider, whether it's a registered social landlord, Citizens Advice Bureau, a financial inclusion team within the housing service, that those services work together to try and provide a solution to those clients. The strategy is available, and essentially it's about improving the financial assistance and support for the residents of Torfaen, maximising immediate help and support, targeting workless households, identifying those at risk of moving into poverty, coordinating bespoke communication messages. And those strands of work are set within an action plan that the Welfare Reform Project Group oversee. So it's an ongoing iterative process. And I'll take one example. Through Welsh Government Support and People Programme, the Council commissions a number of housing-related support services, and there's a compulsory outcomes framework around that. And one of the themes, the outcomes indicators, is around managing money. So all the organisations that are involved with those services will, on a daily basis, the support workers within whichever setting, whether it's the young person supported housing in Pontypool, whether it's refuge provision, whether it's support workers working in Torfaen Mind or Goval or Gwalia, etc., they will be working with their clients. And if that client has got a support need around managing money, universal credit, whatever, it will be their job to work with them to try and sort that out for them. So that will include managing budgets, accessing universal credit or other benefits, getting into work. So what we've tried to develop across Torfaen is a strategy, an infrastructure and a way of monitoring all those services, because there are a number that operate across Torfaen, and that includes, the people sat around the table today. So I don't know whether that helps, but I do agree there will be people that sometimes don't come forward until the latest point. And we're trying to reach those people as well, rather than let it get to crisis.
Thank you very much.
Hi, if I could just add to that. A lot of our work is kind of twin-tracked, really, and I think that statement was used in the report that was circulated. So it's around a balance of crisis solutions, but also prevention solutions. So how are we reaching those before they hit crisis? If I just take a housing kind of feel, if that's okay with you, a lot of our work, I now manage the pre-tenancy team within Bronavon as well. We work very closely, obviously, with the circle of people in the room. And for us, what that means is really stripping back before applicants who are bidding on Home Seeker become our tenants, or whether RSL tenants, or even are in temporary accommodation, hostels, etc., for us around getting to know them. So what do they need to know? What have they got to do? So they need to know how they afford a property, what their support needs are, where they need to go, what they need to do, before they actually get shortlisted for a property and then go, I don't know, I can't afford it, I don't know where to go. Actually, we're doing all that work upstream. So what I mean by that is we will sit with them, we will have a relationship with them, we will talk about what income they've got coming in, what income they've got going out, can they afford a property, how much does a property cost, not just the rent, it's about gas, electric, water, food, clothing, etc. So it's broken down so they can understand the true cost of a safe, affordable home. And then what we do is we don't just leave them with the kind of reality, which is quite shocking, to some of our young people and older people that we're working with. We're actually working with them about solutions so they are tenancy ready when they hit the shortlist. What that means is helping them in to find a job, helping them into work and giving them the skills and confidence in order to do that. What that means is looking at what's their support needs. Very high level around mental health is a massive gap, I have to reiterate that. Where do they need to go in order to have support so they're able to move forward, so they can live a safe, independent life in an affordable accommodation? So all that work is going on up front. When they actually then come to us, for example, as Bronavon is one of the key RSLs within Torfaen, we operate a number of programmes for young people in particular. Our young people do struggle, I have to say, in their first year tenancy with us. And our response to that is we've created a programme, many of you will be aware of, called Own 2 Feet Living. And what it does is it breaks down a relationship with the young person to address key issues around affordability, key life skills, independence, healthy living and cooking on a budget. But it also looks at, for us, one of the key areas is risky relationships. And again, the correlation between welfare reforms and safeguarding is quite an interesting piece of work, and I think that we will reach some learning from this process, really. So we run those programmes, but what we're doing is we're now expanding those programmes for everyone, because why are young people different to all of our other customers? Everyone in their life always needs a helping hand when things become a little bit too much, and that's what we're here to do. So we also run our employability projects. We're going live with co-location and a triage system with our DWP colleagues in both Cwmbran and Pontypool in February, also linking in communities for work. We're working very closely with the third sector. I can't say, your services, so whether it's appropriate or not, Councillor Molson, to say are absolutely second to none and really helping our most, vulnerable tenants from a Bronavon perspective, as our food banks and as our CAB, in terms of really making a difference to people's quality of life. But it also is around, I guess, communication. People can't do anything if they don't know, and a lot of our customers coming through the door, they don't know until they get a letter or an email, for those who are digitally literate. And again, high proportion of our tenants are not digitally included, something for us to look at across the table. How do we reach them? How do we communicate that things are changing, the impact? So we have, Councillor Evans, just for information, got some literature, and there's been huge debate whether we do hard copies or just electronic copies, whether it goes on back of buses, etc. But our customers need to know, they need to be a step ahead, so that we take the learning from the past 6 months, so the changes have been a little bit of a surprise to actually prepare the next round of UC full live service claimants. So I'd be happy to share that with you. And we've also got just some information on what support that we do offer. So if you want, again, the offer of you coming into Bronavon, meeting some of our team, sharing some of our experiences, really happy to do that if you think that would be beneficial.
Thank you very much. We have heard from everyone now, and I'm aware this room is required by 12:45. So can I ask Councillor Daniels, do you want to finish up before we start our recommendations?
Sure, Rich, are you sure you didn't want to come in?
Only a very last quick, and just to echo some of the comments Emma's made, what we try and facilitate, certainly on a bi-monthly basis, a community hub days in job centres. So if there's a particular area that we want to focus on, mental health, homelessness, budgeting, then we would look to invite some of those key partners that can support, and they can, have a desk or working area in the job centre, so customers can, make that engagement to take perhaps a conversation away from the job centre, but it's to make sure that customers are aware of what support is out there, and those work really well. What we tend to do is encourage all of our customer base to attend the job centre on that particular day, so they can link up with some of these support agencies. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, as there's a group of people here, very, very proud of the work that you guys do communicating with each other. You all run your individual teams, but you all have reports that go below you. How much cooperation and how much training is done with your staff on a similar basis? And do you actually have training sessions where your staff come together so that they can actually relate on an individual basis? And related to that, are there any issues with regard to data protection and safeguarding which hamper you sharing information about clients across services? So it's two questions, but if someone...
I can pick it up from an authority perspective. There's a considerable effort that goes into training and communication on an ongoing basis with staff. And in terms of frontline, we incorporate a lot of feedback that we have from staff at the front line into those training sessions. So it's an ongoing suite of training. Probably that would go for all organisations, wouldn't it, here? Did you want to make a comment?
No, the only observation I'll make on that, I think in terms of the joint training, I know there's been bilateral training that's common to a number of partners, has been delivered both by the DWP and by Richard's team across the partnership. Separate to this but related, we also convene what we call the Benefits and Money Advice Network, which is a much wider group of partners. And through there, I know we've had presentations and training delivered from people like the illegal money lending unit in terms of common things to watch for. So there are a range of things that are going on, but we could probably provide you with a more detailed response if you wanted to explore that in more detail.
Just quickly, is that training that's done within their individual teams, or is it training that's done with members from all of their teams in the same room? It's across the board. And they can, okay.
There were representatives of about 30 or 40 different organisations there receiving that training and awareness.
The second part of that was, are there any issues that hamper us with data protection and safeguarding and information across across the various angles?
Yeah, there are issues that hamper us with data protection, but we have information sharing protocols with the Department of Work and Pensions as an authority. We also have an ability to share information between social care and housing and revenues and benefits within the authority. We have information sharing protocols with registered social landlords in the authority. So to a limited extent we can provide information. The amount of information that revenues and benefits and the DWP can share is probably of greatest value, and then we can so there are limitations then in what we can pass out. I mean, the best way of opening up information about a customer is to ask for their authority. You can share information on their behalf, and that's quite often what the CAB and other partners are able to do to get an authority to act on behalf of the customer, and then there's more ability to access information and data about them.
Yeah, just to add to that in the context of safeguarding, which I think was particularly referenced in your question, one of the things that we've tried to ensure, certainly as a local authority, is that there's a very high level of awareness of the safeguarding protocols universally throughout the council. So talking about my own division in community services, we were nearly, can't talk about the effectiveness of that training, but nearly universally, just about everybody in community services now has had the level 1 safeguarding training and awareness. So the point being that information sharing shouldn't restrict safeguarding. If there is a safeguarding concern, that overrides the information sharing concern if it's appropriate to do so. Can never be totally confident in that, in saying that you've got very good safeguarding arrangements, but I think they are very well developed and fairly extensive throughout Torfaen now, and you looked at that in some detail last time around as a committee, and that obviously plays into our work across the partnership as well. There was one other point I was going to make and I've forgotten what it was, so apologies for that.
Mal?
Can you put your mic on, please?
Sorry. We're piloting a project called ReferNet, which is an online referral system. It makes it very easy for agencies to track and to forward information about clients, other clients' files, or other advice to that agency. And it also enables the sending agency to confirm that they have the permission of the client to forward that data. So that's a practical way which can improve referral between agencies and clean up the data protection issues, which of course become a bit more stringent and have to be more specific from April under the new regulation. So, I just wanted to point that out. And if agencies are not involved in ReferNet, I can sign them up.
So, Chair, I think that's exactly the point we're going to make. The general data processing stuff is going to probably be a little bit more complex in something that's already complicated. If I could just excuse myself and Richard, we are due elsewhere. I know that the last part of it is to talk directly to the executive member. In leaving, if that's okay, Chair, I would just say one thing from my perspective. You're obviously looking at the partnership arrangements as well as the impact that Universal Credit's had. I've personally held the view, and I think it's been expressed by others probably more articulately than by me, this is a very good partnership arrangement. That is simply because of the individuals involved in it. The leadership of that system is with the executive member, who's been exemplary, I think, in terms of commitment to ensuring that officers are very clear about what's expected in terms of that group. Obviously, all the partners that are here today, it goes without saying that from a personal point of view, they are very well engaged in supporting your work as a council. I think that's been recognised, and you may want to comment on that further. I would just go one step further and say the 3 officers that are employed by your council that are with me today are exemplary.
Thank you very much, and I think we all run the table. Thank you very much for coming and giving us your information. Thank you very much. Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly chip in because you posed a question around data sharing and relationships and things. In the most part, I'd say, across the table, whether it be CB or as areas of the council or housing benefit, we've developed great relationships. Housing benefit's been over 3 decades, haven't it? So we've had time to work on it. So that's been fantastic when we share information for the benefit of the customer. I think there's a recognition that between RSLs, Brunavon and the DWP, there's still some work to do, I think, in terms of how much information we share and to make sure that we can share a bit more information and communicate a little bit better for the benefit of the customer at hand. As I know Richard's new into the role, as am I really. And Richard's been great in terms of really looking to work with us. We've got another meeting next week, so I'm hopeful that as time goes on and the relationship with the DWP grows, because it's only been 6 months that we've had that relationship really. I'm hoping that the information sharing between us can be the same as we see around the table and with the council really.
Thank you very much.
Yep, I'm conscious of the time. Maybe I'll try and sort of be brief as possible. I mean, it's been mentioned by a lot of people today about the effectiveness of this working partnership that we've got with all our partners, and very adequately with Dave just then actually paying tribute to our own staff who are exemplary. In fact, all our partners that are represented on the representatives they do send are exemplary. And crucially, obviously, the DWP are engaged and they do turn out and they do take on board everything that we feed back to them. So they're doing their bit on a local level. I've reiterated that 3 times, but I think it's important to kind of make that distinction between the national and the local. So I was asked to put forward a couple of examples of the work that the Welfare Reform Project Group does. And basically to describe the group, but actually I think we've had a lot of that through today in terms of the inclusive nature and the capacity for information exchange. It's been absolutely vital. I don't enjoy the subjects we talk about, but I do enjoy the relationships and I do enjoy the dynamics we've got in that group. I think it is genuinely one of the most effective and useful forums we do have for actually translating information into action. So I think we've had some really good outcomes on it, some of which I'll read out now, really. So it's for me in particular, it's fed into a couple of decisions, quite key decisions for me anyway, in terms of prioritising information services such as CAB. So we've largely tried to protect the existing funding that we give to organisations like CAB, Age Connect, and we've also started to reinvest in some of the services because information and advocacy is a best buy. I haven't got any statistics, and maybe Mal will be able to come in later, but to show how much each pain sort of brings back into the borough. So it's an absolute best buy. So we've prioritised protecting those. And I'm glad that we brought in DAP as well, because there was a particular aspect with Universal Credit which impacts on disabled people and people with accessibility needs, which we touched on today. So there's a specific need there. Feeding into it, we've agreed funding for Eastern Valley Food Bank, and I know we're revisiting it to maybe look at increasing the funding in light of the increased need that's come out of Universal Credit. The Eastern Valley Food Bank, I think I've got to pay tribute to them actually. Over Christmas, they were absolutely fantastic, and I know that they had the busiest Christmas they've had on record. And I think it's important to maybe look at some of the statistics that you see. There's one statistic in there, and I'm reeling off in my head. I think October 2016, there were about 460 people fed by the Pontypridd Food Bank across Torfaen. 2017 October, I think it was 900, so it nearly doubled. Well, if not, it did double. My maths is terrible, but it's very difficult to say that there is causation. I think the report actually says that, but I think that there is a strong correlation between Universal Credit and increased food bank usage, sadly. And these are people in crisis. This is not where we want to be catching people. We do not want to be catching them at that point, because that's the point where they have acute needs, which are more expensive than if further down the line we were there and you know, systems and structures were there to catch them before they declined into the need to turn out for food and heating, electricity, and all those very, very basic things. We've also, I think I've mentioned this in a previous Welfare Reform Project Group scrutiny, we've got CAB advisors in food banks. Again, that's not where we want to be catching people, but it has turned out to be a valuable service, and they have been catching people before they have been going into further debt, and they have been able to advise people into a more resilient position, because I think that's the key word, is resilience, because I think people in work and out of work at the moment aren't terribly resilient, so shocks to the system such as welfare reform changes are particularly badly felt by some, particularly the poorest. We've got, as mentioned, I think by Emma actually, we've got a joint issues log where all our partners can put into one big pot, which then is what the word is. Basically, it's put into one big pot and it's given an oversight, which is then fed into the DWP, who then be able to act on it and give their feedback on what sort of changes we can make locally to mitigate some of the problems that have been logged from various different partners, whether it be RSLs or CAB or any of our partners. Going on a bit now. We've put in place, as mentioned earlier, we've put in place some joint training on universal credit specifically to our partners to make sure that different agencies represented in the Welfare Reform Group are introduced to better referral routes and mechanisms so that each of our partners becomes a referral for each other sort of thing, which I think is absolutely vital, because I think silo working is not the sort... If you're in that territory on a subject like this, I mean, you're in the wrong territory, which is why this works so well, because I think we do communicate incredibly well with each other where possible. Richard's gone now, but we've, as a partnership, we've made sure that those needing the financial support of discretionary housing payments are well signposted and supported to access it. And I'm very, very pleased to say we are the top authority actually for making use of discretionary housing payments, joint top with Monmouthshire, because we administer it for both. So I think that's a real positive thing from our perspective, and it's a real indication of the quality of team that we've got in Revs and Bens and across the council. It's helped me consider how we could respond to financial challenges associated with welfare reform. Again, I think I brought this to a previous Welfare Reform Project Group scrutiny, but this is a new set. I'm aware you're a new set. We've got something called the Welsh Church Fund, which previously used to be used. It's not a huge sum of money. It's about 40,000 a year, and it's previously been used for such things as community hall curtains, days out trips, replacement books. It's all valuable stuff in one context, but in the context of increasing poverty and hardship, I think we had only one way to go, really, which was to refocus it so that it acted as a hardship fund, and that's what we have done. And we have since found that it's become an incredibly vital tool, especially the discretionary nature. And some of our partners may have had experience of referring into that system, but the discretionary nature means that. And I've had ground level experience of this because, for disclosure, I volunteer with Track 2. I have witnessed some referrals we have had in where people have absolutely nothing, no bed, no cooker. I mean, it's pitiful to see some people in those sorts of situations, and I feel sick at feeling pity in that because I'm no better or worse than them. So I'm very pleased with that decision, and that was very much fed in by the information that I got from Welfare Reform Project Group, and it's gone to help a lot of people. Beyond that, we've got the Early Intervention and Prevention Fund, which is that was agreed, and I'm very, very thankful to the leader of this council for securing that for us and protecting it into this year. Part of that is going to be dedicated towards mitigating the impact of universal credit. As mentioned already, there's been some projects we've invested in, and they will be increasing capacity for dealing with the fallout from universal credit, but hopefully mitigate, helping people get more resilient, because I think this twin-tracked approach is important, because I think as well as mitigating the impact, we also have to be building resilience for people to make sure that any further shocks in the system they can sustain slightly better, because I think something that's forgotten sometimes is this: each welfare change is impacting on the same group of people, so it's not acting on different people. The bedroom tax benefit cap, child benefit, this is in many cases acting on the same demographic of people, so they're becoming poorer and poorer each time. So those projects that we have invested in, £197,600 of which we've invested in Citizens Advice's Good With Money project. That's a 5-step programme, as Miles probably explained earlier, of practical advice and education designed to help families take control of their finances and become more resilient to the impact of future events. We've invested in Disability Advice project. They've got a universal credit caseworker now, because, as I said, there are specific challenges there for disabled people and people with accessibility issues, and we absolutely need to increase the capacity for that. to support them through this, because they are incredibly vulnerable to this. And this system is it can be quite daunting. I think they are one issue I will probably raise in a future welfare reform project group, and probably with Richard afterwards, is just the accessibility of everything. Because I did speak to Disability Advice Project late last year, talking about the accessibility of the websites and just making sure that everything's accessible for all sorts of needs and everything. So that's a vital investment. Financial inclusion team, again, Dave and various others have I'll try and wrap up quickly. I've spoken about how vital that is. That's putting people in touch with all the agencies around this table, and also making sure that they're resilient in their finances, mental health, all sorts. And then finally, track 2 as well. I don't know, maybe Sue might want to speak for herself after this, but that's an absolutely vital crisis intervention service, which is stepping in when people are finding themselves without money for a prolonged period of time, and when the cooker breaks down, when they haven't got a bed, when they have been domestically abused, or they have found themselves homeless. That's an absolutely vital service, which I'm proud that we're investing in. I think I'm done, actually, so I'll leave you guys ask questions if you'd like.
Mind we haven't got much time. We've got 15 minutes for questions and recommendations.
Right, just to remind the committee that we've got a view from here at 1:15. I could stay here all day, but unfortunately we've got a time constraint. Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Obviously, I'm really pleased that all of you managed to attend the scrutiny committee this morning, but there's one major partner that's not here, and that's an Iron Bevan Health Board. We've talked enormously about mental health issues and other disabilities and things. What kind of partnership do you all have with the Iron Bevan Health Board?
Our partnership with an Iron Bevan is improving all of the time, and quite specifically with our neighbourhood care networks. So in Torvine, the GP cluster groups are clustered into neighbourhood care networks, one in the north and one in the south, where all GP practices are represented with a number of community partners. And one investment that the NCN's in partnership with the council has made since 2015 in the north and since January last year in the south is with social prescribers. And they're based in all of the GP surgeries across Torvine as the link between primary care and everything else. So any GP or district nurse who identifies that a patient has a social issue now has a point of contact they can pass that individual on to, whereas before they knew there was a range of services out there to help and they didn't know where to start. So they now pass those patients onto the social prescribers who will have that conversation, and that has greatly improved our relationship with local GPs. And then more extensively we're working with others such as occupational therapy, rheumatology and physiotherapy on fibromyalgia is our example at the moment, but on people with long-term health conditions, particularly musculoskeletal issues, is one major cohort of people receiving ESA and disability payments. So growing relationship with them, and also I was with the consultant lead for the primary care mental health team yesterday, and lots of conversations with them. So missed a trick with perhaps having them represented today, but definitely those partnerships are there.
Right, I'd like to thank everybody for answering questions so faithfully, and I know there's a lot of passion out there, and I know we got a lot of problems. Hopefully we can all work together and go forward. Thank you very much for turning up. Thank you.
Okay, as we're as we know, we're short for time, so I wouldn't normally start until the invitees had left. But if I can just remind members of the key question, which will bring us back to help you form your recommendations. So the key question is, what else could the Council and local partners be doing to work effectively at a local level to both implement the full service universal credit and support residents impacted by the change? So has anyone got any recommendations that they'd like to put forward based on today?
Councillor Jones first.
I think something that came up when we were listening was the fact that there's so many people who find digital access so difficult, and although people were working on that, I think there's perhaps more work to do in that area, around vulnerable people and digital access to forms, and perhaps more work with their coaches, their work coaches and things. I don't know how we'd put that into into something cohesive that perhaps would explain that perhaps there is a gap still there, despite all the good work that's going on.
Councillor Seymour?
Yeah. I think we need to pick up on Dave Congreve's point about the fact that we are left with a legacy because we're a pilot project, and it may, I don't know that the motion has gone to the Pensions Minister yet, but it could be included as a commentary on our experience from Torvine's point and the legacy that we've had left us, that will take us years to get over. So I think that's a major point that needs to be included.
Right. Councillor Jones?
I think we also need to pick up on this basic point of people, when they identify themselves to making an application, to make sure that is followed through, to make sure that they don't fall out of the system and then having to go back into it again. Because so many people come forward, but then their claim isn't valid for some reason, and I don't see that there is any follow-through to make sure that those people don't then fall out of the system and then become even worse. I don't know how we're going to word that, but we need to make sure that process, the processes are strengthened to make sure that nobody falls out of the system.
Councillor Seymour?
Another point was the research that Faye actually mentioned and that Dave Congreve said if Scrutiny would like to recommend. I think that's a definite one that we can pick up on.
Chair,
Councillor Evans?
Joanne, who can't be here today, was keen to get some involvement with education as well, about the implications that affect people through that route. So I think Joanne would want that to go forward. Perhaps she's got in touch with Catherine or aware of it.
No, she hasn't. So I don't know what it is as a recommendation that you want, because obviously we didn't discuss that directly with officers or any of the partners today. Do you know what exactly it is that you think she would want to raise?
I think she wants that education staff would be aware of the circumstances where they could passport people as well.
Yeah.
So do you mean in as much as sharing information? Yeah. I don't know if that already happens or whether they're trained to do that. I'm not sure how to raise that now in this instance when it hasn't been raised this morning.
Perhaps they need.
Oh, sorry. I think we need to compliment our staff on the work that we're doing as a committee. I think a long time I've been shouting about a better system for free school meals identification, and the fact that Revs and Benefits have taken that on board is a major issue. I've said all along, why can't the benefit system identify the free school meals students? Because it isn't on take-up, it's on entitlement, and that is a major thing. If people are coming in for benefit relief, they then automatically get the free school meal advice. So I think that's.
Councillor Jones?
Could I just say that I think that letter to the right minister is very important with the extra bits put in that we found out here today? And could we suggest that there's a formal invitation to a research fellow to come and work with Torfaen on the information that they already have, and to look at the gaps that in provision and the impact this is going to have, the catastrophic impact, I think, on the future on so many different aspects of people's lives?
Chair, could I come in on the... Richard made the point about the one-off discretionary payment of 40k. I was wondering if they could consider that in the future, perhaps reinstating that 40k discretionary allowance.
Maybe we ought to pick up on David Daniels, Councillor Daniels' point of the universal credit being a mechanism to help people back into work and when they fall out of work, and to look at implementing people's ability to get back into work as being sort of a major priority of rather than just sort of help them out all the time, but to actually help them to help themselves as well. I don't know how we're going to word that as a proposal, but it was a very fair point that was made to stop people dropping from a point right the way down, and for us to be able to catch them and to be able to help them back. That'll raise or release funds to be able to help the more desperate in society then.
Councillor Molson.
Dave Daniels did make a very valid point there. The structure at the moment with the working agencies that were all here today that work together, each and every one of them can identify a need and work with that need. And I can foresee, which I've foreseen with the agencies I've worked with here today, over 2 years ago, the impact within Torfaen and how we are dealing with it now. We are forward planning as a group. We only had a meeting last week to cover this Christmas coming for emergency cover to be out there with other working agencies. So the much support that we can give to these agencies that work with clients to assist them through mental health, assist them through financial debt, assist them to get back into work is much needed, and support and assistance will be greater within the next 6 to 12 months. So, support it.
Just one thing.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing for consideration has been mentioned, the work that we do with our social landlords, and I think it's key that we continue that work and perhaps improve it in some way.
Can I just pick up on that in the fact that they did mention that they're now working or trying to work with more private landlords, and I hope there's no gaps there because there's got to be safeguards with private landlords, isn't there? And I hope we're doing something to make sure that they are in the loop and all the safeguarding bits and everything are being seen and nobody on either side is getting exploited.
Okay, I think we can just close the meeting.
I got, do you want me to read that or we've got?
Oh.
Okay, then just to, none of those points I don't think were written in the format that you'll expect them to go into, so I'll just go through it all and then try and put them into a format that you'll be happy with and send them out for you to approve afterwards. So there's more to do around digital access and being aware that not everyone is able to access digitally, so to do what we can. But the legacy in Torfaen and the experience that it's left us with, and whether or not some of the points that were brought up about lobbying almost for more assistance, and there were a couple of points. Is there anything practically that DWP can do at a higher level to help Torfaen? Can this be explored at a senior level? So I think that sits in with that, yeah?
I think it's the backlog, because anybody being rolled out now is not going to have the same problem as we had.
No.
We've got financial constraints on us now to actually catch up.
Yeah. There was also a question that Richard Davis asked of DWP. Now, I don't know whether you want to include this is DWP need to make recognition of what has been discussed today and the consequences of that rollout within TCBC. And if they can recognise that and feed that back to other authorities who are likely to be going through the process and learning from it. More to be done to ensure there's the follow-through if they fall out of the system during application process. As at the end then, but I'll say it in the order that it was given, compliment to our staff for the work being done by our officers and the partners, reinstating the 40k discretionary allowance, implementing the ability to get those who have dropped off the work scale back into work, as well as just trying to help them financially, and continue working with social landlords and private landlords to help them, but to ensure that both parties are safeguarded.
Chair, could I come in very, very briefly?
Yes, Stuart.
Perhaps another option is to include women's aid in the reform group as well as, dare I say it, an Iron Bevan Health Board.
I think we really need to stress that the mental health issues that is evolving out of the universal credit has come out of most persons' conversations here today.
I wonder alongside that, could we capture in our concern? Our concern about the one payment being paid to one member of family?
All I'll say on that is the policy, and as Dave and everyone else said today, there's nothing we can do to you know.
Councillor Jones?
Thanks. Oh, sorry. I was just wondering, in that summary you've got there, have you got about the letter that Councillor Seaborn was discussing to send and adding bits that have come out of this to it, and also about requesting a research fellow to look at the implications of what's happened in Torfaen? That's in there, is it?
I think I missed that, but I've got it there.
That's great. Okay, thank you.
Can I say then, in relation to the letter, would it be useful for us to ask Councillor Daniels to do that from an executive member process and include the things that we've got concerns about today?
There was a motion put to council prior to December, and a lot of those bullet points are on there. So if you have a look at the, I don't know whether before they send it through to the minister that they have to agree the minutes. I don't know how it works with the council minutes. So my motion will be in the council minutes and accepted. And there's certain points that we've got here, but there's the addition of where Torfaen is after, in doing catch-up at that point needs to be inserted to the minister.
I'll find out then what the correct procedure is with that, because I'm not 100% sure of that, and then we'll work it in that way.
So when we're sending it to the minister, we need to also involve the Welsh Assembly, because obviously they're a secondary thing for our budget. So that point about where we are paying catch-up and how much Torfaen is going to have to pay out over the years to get back to where we were prior to universal credit, I think needs to be at all levels of government, really.
Right, the next meeting will be March the 15th, 2018. I'd like to close the meeting and thank everyone for attending. Thank you very much.